Hello, hello. My name is Nikki Patton. Hello, fellow Spahi students. Today I'll be presenting to you on Chapter 8 from our book on Understanding College and University Organization, which is about organizational learning. So to start us off, we're going to define what organizational learning is. Let me move so based on our book, based on BSN-D, organizational learning is an interactive process that creates and recreates a shared knowledge base, which guides behavior, shapes meaning and experience, and institutionalizes learning that occurs at the individual and group levels. So to clarify, organizational learning isn't the same as the people within the organizational learning. And the sum of everyone in organizational learning doesn't equal organization learning. It is its own thing for the organization to have learned. To start off, the chapter discusses some possible negative learning outcomes, some ways that learning can be incorrect or bad in nature. And there are 6 main organizational learning traps. The first is superstitious learning, which happens when you incorrectly attribute a result to a specific action. So for example, a college might think that its new recruitment strategy has improved its enrollment when it's actually just an increase in high school graduates across the board. The second is the ambiguity of success, which is basically just uncertainty about what is success. So for example, an increase in applicants to live on campus for Residence Life Office, is that good or is it bad? It'll be, well, maybe it's good because they're going to make more money. Maybe it's bad because they are now over their space limit and can't house everybody who applied. The third is the competency trap, and this happens when an institution continues to invest in proven procedures that have worked in the past. So for example, a college can continue to use a specific recruitment strategy that's worked in the past. Yes, it works, but could there be a better strategy out there? Then we have the familiarity trap, which is the use of a common process that's maybe standard across the industry. So a college using SAT or ACT scores to determine admissions because it's what everybody else does. Then we have the maturity trap. So this is the use of procedures that have been in the organization for a while and using them just because they're a part of the org. So a college continues to use paper to log its residence hall condition reports because that's what it has always done and it works for them. And then finally, the propinquity trap, I really struggle with pronouncing that, which is the use of procedures similar to what has worked in the past. So this might look like a college switching from one CRM system to a similar one for budget reasons, and not looking at other options or other types of CRM systems. So these traps can really keep you from truly learning, and it's important to learn through failure instead of just looking for success. If you don't learn through failure, if an organization doesn't learn through failure, innovation will not happen, and the learning might not actually happen. And failure to learn stunts an organization's growth. So first off, we're going to talk about organizational learning as a process. According to Huber, there are 5 processes through which learning happens within organizations. The first is congenital learning. So this is passed to employees or to the organization via founders. So a college opens a new branch and that new branch inherits its knowledge from the main campus. Experiential learning is what is gained through experimentation. So a university might conduct a pilot project, or maybe they're reflecting on a situation. Here, more experience equals more proficiency, which is kind of an illustration of the learning curve. So something with a particularly steep learning curve will take more experimenting to learn, and something with a fairly mild learning curve, you can learn quickly and through only a little bit of experimenting. Vicarious learning happens when your organization learns from another organization. So a college might copy a competitor's marketing strategy. This is passive and it's reactive instead of reflective and innovative. So this can actually fall back on some of those negative learning outcomes. Grafting is what happens when you gain knowledge from acquisition of new members or new units. So a private college that previously didn't have any sort of a nursing program acquires a standalone college of nursing. Now the private college has acquired a new area of expertise, a new area of knowledge. Searching and scanning is what happens when knowledge is discovered by searching for solutions to a problem or interacting with an intent to understand the environment. So an example of searching would be community college students, community college searches for solutions to its retention problems by creating a study group to do research at other institutions and doing a literature review. And then they implement their findings. And scanning, an example of that would be if a school conducts a market survey just for the sake of understanding emerging demands, not having something specific that they're looking for. Bapuji and Croson have one additional learning process that they add to this list, which is the interorganizational learning process. And this is similar to the vicarious learning, but kind of a better version. So this is what happens when two organizations collaborate and learning happens there. So this is better than vicarious learning because everyone is contributing, which means that everybody is kind of progressing their learning instead of being reactive. So Carol, Rudolph, and Hata Kanaka theorize about the different stages of learning and talk about how an organization can move from one to another. And they say that there are four main stages of learning, progressing from smallest to largest. So the first would be the local stage. So this is learning that is unspoken, it's unofficial, it's very organization specific. So this is typically knowledge from the original organization's members, maybe its founders. These pieces of knowledge are unspoken. They're task specific, organization specific, not usually codified or written down, not official, and the knowledge really only applies to this specific organization. Characteristics of this type of knowledge or learning are denying problems and having limited know-how. Constrained learning is official, it's very rule-bound, and again, organization specific. So this takes place when a defined organization, so usually a bureaucracy, is made up of assumptions, habits, and routines that have been codified. So these are the things that have been written down. Here, learning is directed at solving very specific problems by searching through the existing guidance, so through what they've already done in the past. So this stage is characterized by compliance with rules and the fixing of symptoms. The open stage of learning is a lot more explicit, it's diverse, it's socially based. So here it's less constrained by rules and regulations. That kind of like unknown, unofficial, tacit knowledge becomes more explicit. There's an openness to new viewpoints and gaining these new viewpoints through a focus on relationships. And this stage can be characterized by benchmarking by the best out there and high communication. And then finally, the deep stage of learning has a real focus on expert, embracing failure, and kind of collective work. So here, learning becomes linked to professional practice and expert knowledge. Things are not just accepted, everything's kind of questioned, and failure is seen more so as an opportunity to learn rather than like a bad thing. Members work to act collectively instead of just collaborating, they're actually acting. And this is characterized by a systems model and the challenging of assumptions. There we go. And then the final organizational learning as a process theory that we have here is by Argyris and Schoen, and their theory is the single and double loop learning theory. So here, as you can see, we have first the single loop and then the double loop. The single loop happens when organizations take actions, they do something, they observe the outcomes, they see what happens, and then they fix any overt problems. So they do something, they see like maybe one issue, and they just kind of fix the symptom, put a Band-Aid on it. Double loop learning happens when an organization takes an action, observes the outcome, and then questions why that outcome happened. Why did something negative happen? Why did something positive happen? What are the assumptions, the values, the beliefs, the culture behind the organization's actions? And then based on their analysis, they move kind of back into that double loop area. So they change their actions and then they repeat, act, look at the outcomes, question why the outcomes happen. So this is a lot less of a symptom fixing solution and more of a dealing with the actual problem behind it. Oops. So while earlier we explained that organizational learning is not equal to its members' learning, it is important to note that organizational learning does start with individuals. So here we will start with Kolb's theory of experiential learning. Kolb theorizes that learning progresses through 4 different steps, but people tend to prefer kind of a combination of 2. So the first is concrete experiences, which allow a person to undergo a situation, they experience something, they interact, and then they can draw on that stuff later. So this would be a president interacting with potential donors. Reflective observation is when a person can observe the experiences that they went through, and then they discover insights about those interactions. So the president observes that the donors are most attracted to opportunities to endow scholarships for students. During abstract conceptualization, learners make inferences about their observations and then use these to create ideas. So the president, based on his observations, concludes that the donors want to have a tangible impact on students' lives. And then in active experimentation, the learner experiments based on the ideas that they came up with. So the president might invite donors to campus to meet student recipients of previous scholarship awards in an attempt to increase donations. So based on these, there are 4 different types of learners. Divergers prefer concrete experience and reflective observation. So they gain an experience and then they reflect on it. They are best at generating ideas and brainstorming ideas. Assimilators prefer to observe and then conceptualize or think about it. So they see life through conceptualization by reflecting, and they reflect on their observations. So they are best at putting information into concise forms. Convergers prefer to absorb information and then turn it into actions. So they prefer kind of like that conceptualization and then the active experimentation. And they are best at technical tasks and problem solving. And then finally, accommodators, again, they go through concrete experiences and then experiment based on their experiences. So these people are best at risk-taking and adapting ideas to new situations. So basically the idea here is that it's really important for all 4 types of learners to be present in an organization in order for organizational learning to happen. If there's only one type of learner, then they're going to miss a portion of the cycle and the organization won't be able to learn. So Crossan and et al. Theorized that organizations gain knowledge from individuals by developing shared mental models across the organization. So based on the definition of what a mental model is based on the book is mental models are thought constructs that shape how people see the world. So it's essentially just a way of thinking. So based on March's theory, which is that organizational learning has to balance exploration of new ideas and exploitation of existing information. And this happens through feeding forward and feedback. Feeding forward happens when a new idea for recruitment for an admissions officer or a new idea that an admissions officer comes up with, they pass it along to the enrollment manager. So here they're exploring a new idea from an individual. That would be feeding forward. And then feedback happens when maybe the idea doesn't work. So the institution uses its existing knowledge to stop the implementation of the idea. And here they are exploiting existing knowledge. So here the idea is that you have to kind of balance those 2 processes. You can't just be exploiting or just exploring. So here I'll show you a picture from the book. So it's important to note that it's not a very linear process. It kind of bounces back and forth. So you might move forward from one step to another, but then bounce back. And the 4 steps that happen here are intuiting, interpreting, integrating, and institutionalizing. And each of these happen either just an individual does it or a group does it, and then finally an organization might do it. So intuiting happens at the individual level. This is the recognition of a pattern and then making an insight upon it. So this is not necessarily thought out. So sometimes it's knowing how to do something based on your experience, or recognizing a new opportunity. You can't really explain your intuitions to others. Interpretation kind of happens between that individual and group level. So here you're creating a shared meaning or a shared understanding. So faculty might develop a shared mental model on outreach to local hospitals for clinical positions for their nursing students. So here this would be happening at a group level. The group members need to work together to make their mental models, each of their individual mental models, explicit. And then they need to be open to alternative viewpoints and change their opinions based on the other points of view to kind of work together to interpret each other's mental models and create a standard one across the group. Integrating is also done at the group level. So here the group incorporates their new shared mental model into their work. Their knowledge is put to the test. So this can be helpful also to kind of gain maybe those stragglers who aren't quite on board yet. So it's helpful when discussion isn't quite enough to create a shared model. Sometimes acting on it can kind of help put it into vision. Institutionalizing happens at the organization level. And so this is what happens when the behaviors learned through integrating are embedded into the full institution or organization. So again, not a linear process. A group might learn something. They try to pass it on to the institution. Doesn't really apply to the organization as a whole. So it goes back to the group or even the individual level for kind of reprocessing. So up until now, we have mostly been talking about learning as a cognitive process, and now we're going to look at it as learning through an institution's culture. So Cook and Yano are some of the prominent theorists here. Based on them, organizational learning occurs through the socialization process of new employees and is manifested in the rituals, the symbols, instead of a mental model. So this can be seen through the organization's collective know-how, which is unique to each organization. The collective know-how isn't transferable. Even if a whole group of employees were to transfer organizations, they couldn't replicate the collective know-how or culture of their previous organization. For example, if all of the staff and faculty from CUW were to be moved to Michigan State, that wouldn't make Michigan State CUW. It would still just be Michigan State. So this is the process of creating a shared understanding of culture and how that is the process of learning. And sometimes you have to relearn relearn the culture, especially when the organization is faced with a tough situation. So for example, if an organization is on the brink of financial collapse, they can work on relearning their culture and discover what is important to them, and then through there create a vision that is shared. So from here, we look at the dialectical perspectives, which are an extension of Cook and Yano's theories. These are done by Weick and Wesley. And this explains how cultural learning kind of happens. So they say that organizing and learning are actually antithetical processes. So the process of learning is disorganizing, increasing variety, kind of tearing stuff down. And then organizing is reducing the variety, bringing things together. So this is visible in that certain types of organizations that are more organized, like bureaucracies, tend to not have as much learning that is happening. So it's important for the organizing and the learning to exist in a tension in order for true organizational learning to take place. They identified 3 mechanisms to kind of maintain this tension. So first off, you have humor. Humor can really destabilize organizational meanings and it can reinforce connection. So it provides opportunities for learning. For example, an inside joke would draw upon previous collective experiences to kind of create a sense of harmony. Small wins are, as defined in the book, controllable opportunities of modest size that produce visible and tangible outcomes. So I had kind of a hard time wrapping my mind around this one, so I'll pull an example straight from the book. So a residence hall director might spend a long time arguing with the director of residence life to increase the programming budget for their hall. They're spending a lot of time for maybe a relatively small amount of money. This might seem like a waste of time, but when they convince the director of residence life to make this change, the payout is not only the added money to the programming budget, but it's a subtle organizational shift in priorities. So small wins happen when conflict provides that disruption. And then that can develop new meanings and subtly shift the organization, subtly cause it to learn a little bit. And then finally, improvisation is learning on the spot. So it's planning and acting at the same time. This happens when people are thrown into a situation and they begin to work their way out of it by thinking while doing. So for everything we've read in the book so far, the postmodern perspective is essentially that organizations can't learn. They're fragmented, individuals can't transfer knowledge to organizations. Postmodernists tend to believe that learning never really happens because whoever is at the top determines what is learned. But there is a positive outlook here, and that is that while organizations can't learn, the members of the organization can, people can. And so it's not organizational learning in the way that it's been defined by our previous theories. So looking at the use of some different learning models, we've had some cognitive learning models. We talked about the cultural learning models, dialectical as an extension of cultural learning models, and then finally the postmodern learning models. So Burns and Stocker had this contingency theory, which we learned about earlier in the class. And this provides a framework for when each different model of learning is best, depending on the rate of change or the stability and the complexity of its environment. So given a stable and non-complex environment, institutions will be best to use the cognitive learning models. So here they'll be developing data acquisition processes and they'll be assessing things. This is because the low complexity allows them to avoid information overload. So if it's still a stable environment, but it is more complex, on the other hand, cultural learning models is better suited for this reason, to avoid that information overload. Cultural models focus on the collective know-how, which will help the institution develop an introspective understanding of itself. And this helps them to better meet the diverse needs of their complex environment. Learning based on culture is less perceptive to rapidly changing environments, which is why an environment that is unstable and uncomplex is best met with dialectical learning models. So this model acknowledges and celebrates the tension between the order and the disorder, which is particularly helpful when the environment is unstable. And then when an environment is both unstable and highly complex, it'll best be handled with postmodern learning perspectives, as the emphasis on critique allows many diverse perspectives to develop, and this can help with dealing with that chaotic, complex environment. So the learning organization is this idea of the perfect organization that is able to learn and grow that way. And this is kind of most talked about by Peter Senge. And he laid out 5 disciplines that all workers at an organization must master personally in order for the organization to be considered a learning organization. And here, the first one is the personal mastery. So here, this is an individual working on their learning efforts, working on self-awareness, being very aware of what they know and kind of what's going on around them. Mental models is the emphasis here would be on clarifying what your mental model is and then becoming aware of your coworkers' mental models and the differences, the similarities. The third discipline is that of a shared vision. So here, this is participating in the creation and the awareness of the organization's vision. So this kind of builds on the previous one, looking at the mental models and combining them to build a shared vision. The fourth one is team learning. And so here, there's a lot of discussing and dialoguing with coworkers to work as a team to learn. And then the fifth discipline for the learning organization is systems thinking. And this is looking at things interrelatedly, looking for patterns, seeing how one action affects another part of an organization. The idea here is that as each member of an organization can master these 5 disciplines, if that were to happen, then the organization would best be set to learn and be the most effective. Well, that is what I have for you. Here is the reference for the chapter, and yeah, have a good rest of your day. There we go.